March 9, 2025, a date etched in history, a day that redefined the war in Ukraine. The world watched in disbelief as Russian forces unleashed a daring and devastating offensive, a testament to military cunning and cold calculation. Their weapon? Not tanks or missiles, but the very infrastructure meant to fuel peace, not war. Soviet-era gas pipelines. For 2 days, over 100 elite Russian troops endured a claustrophobic nightmare. They navigated the 1.4-meter-wide pipeline, a steel coffin stretching 16 kilometers. The air, thick with the stench of stale gas and fear, was a constant reminder of the potential for disaster. One spark, one wrong move could turn their clandestine mission into a fiery tomb. Their objective, the small village of Suda, a seemingly insignificant point on the map, but its strategic location near the Russian border made it a linchpin in Ukraine's northern front. For months, Ukrainian forces had repelled Russian assaults in this region, but the enemy was about to rewrite the rules of engagement. As the sun cast long shadows over the battle-scarred landscape, the Russian troops approached their destination. Emerging from the earth like phantoms, they prepared to unleash chaos upon the unsuspecting enemy. The stage was set for a confrontation that would send shockwaves across the globe. The first rays of dawn illuminated a scene of utter devastation. Russian forces, having infiltrated Ukrainian lines, launched a surprise attack on rear positions between the villages of Pavakiz and Vorokazaya. The ambush was swift, brutal, and ruthlessly effective. Caught off guard, Ukrainian troops found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. Communication lines, vital in the heat of battle, went dead, leaving units isolated and vulnerable. The element of surprise, a decisive factor in warfare, belonged entirely to the Russians. Ukrainian forces, though stunned, mounted a fierce defense. Cluster bombs rained down on the attackers while artillery batteries unleashed a thunderous barrage. The ground shook under the weight of the explosions, but the Russian forces, dug in and determined, held their ground. The pipeline, once a symbol of energy and interconnectedness, now served as a conduit for death and destruction. It was a stark reminder that even in the 21st century, the specter of war could twist the mundane into the monstrous. The ambush at Suda was just the opening act of a larger Russian offensive. As the day wore on, the situation for Ukraine deteriorated rapidly. Russian forces, exploiting their initial success, pushed forward relentlessly, their advance punctuated by the rumble of tanks and the clatter of gunfire. Bridges, lifelines for retreating Ukrainian troops, were blown to smithereens, transforming escape routes into death traps. Drone footage, released later by Russian sources, painted a grim picture of the carnage. Destroyed convoys littered the landscape, the charred remains of vehicles bearing testament to the ferocity of the fighting. At least 9 vehicles were identified, but the true toll remained unknown. The names of fallen villages echoed like a death knell. Cherkasayapaya, Kosit, Martinova. One by one they fell under Russian control, marking the crumbling of Ukraine's northern front. Reports emerged of mass surrenders by Ukrainian soldiers, their morale shattered by the relentless onslaught and the lack of support. Section 4, Through the Looking Glass, a shifting battlefield. The fall of Suda had immediate and far-reaching consequences. North of the village, Russian forces, spearheaded by armored columns, surged forward, advancing 6 kilometers in a matter of hours. The villages of Kubatkin, Yashkovsky, and Lebedeva were overrun, their fates sealed in a maelstrom of violence. Ukrainian troops, trapped in a shrinking pocket of resistance, found themselves in a desperate fight for survival. A 3.5-kilometer stretch of road, dubbed the Death Corridor by those who fought there, became a killing ground. Russian artillery rained down on the fleeing soldiers, their escape cut off by the relentless enemy advance. To the south, the situation was equally dire. Ulanovo, a strategic hamlet, fell back into Russian hands, while Kaki hamlet was captured after a brief but intense firefight. In a symbolic blow, Russian forces bombed a Ukrainian headquarters in Zolshenka, further demoralizing the already beleaguered defenders. Section 5, Echoes of Kursk, a precursor to disaster. The events of March 9, 2025, sent shockwaves through the international community. But for those who had been following the conflict closely, there was a chilling sense of déjà vu. The Russian strategy, the use of pipelines for infiltration, the sudden collapse of Ukrainian defenses, it all bore an eerie resemblance to the Battle of Sudzha, fought a year earlier in Kursk Oblast. In August 2024, Ukrainian forces, hoping to gain leverage in peace talks, launched a daring cross-border incursion into Kursk Oblast. Their initial success was short-lived. Russian forces regrouped, launching a counter-offensive that reclaimed much of the lost territory. By March 2025, an estimated 10,000 Ukrainian troops were trapped in a shrinking salient. Their supply lines disrupted, their position increasingly precarious. The Suda offensive, with its echoes of Kursk, raised a troubling question. Had Ukraine learned the lessons of the past, or were they doomed to repeat the same mistakes? Section 6. The Fog of War. Truth as Casualty. As with all conflicts, the war in Ukraine was awash in propaganda and misinformation. Conflicting narratives, often fueled by social media, made it difficult to discern fact from fiction. The fog of war, a potent mix of uncertainty and fear, clouded the battlefield, obscuring the truth. Russian state media predictably hailed the operation as a resounding victory, a testament to the superior skill and determination of their armed forces. Ukrainian sources, on the other hand, downplayed the significance of the losses, claiming that they had inflicted heavy casualties on the attackers, and that the situation was under control. The reality, as always, was likely somewhere in between. Independent verification of claims proved difficult, if not impossible. The only certainty was that the fighting had exacted a heavy toll on both sides, leaving a trail of death, destruction and displacement in its wake. Section 7. A World on Edge. Implications and Uncertain Futures. The ramifications of the Suda offensive extended far beyond the battlefields of Ukraine. The conflict, once a regional crisis, had escalated into a global conflagration, threatening to draw in major powers and plunge the world into a new era of instability. The United States, once a staunch supporter of Ukraine, had grown increasingly hesitant to provide military aid. The recent decision by President Trump to halt all assistance, citing the need for Ukraine to make concessions in peace talks, sent shockwaves through Europe. NATO allies, caught between their commitment to Ukraine and the fear of provoking a wider conflict with Russia, grappled with how to respond. The world watched with bated breath, uncertain of what the future held. The Suda offensive, a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of war, had raised the stakes to an unprecedented level. The question was no longer whether Ukraine could win, but whether the world could afford for the conflict to continue.